Now, I'm not an advocate of violence, and I'm not an advocate of war as the first resort. I'm an advocate of using all the other tools we have available, including the legal system and the communication system and the community systems that we have available. That's our first line of defense and offense in all of this. That we might even win this thing without firing a single shot if we develop the strategies that can work in the midst of that. That would be a great revolution. As we all know, in the wake of the Oklahoma City bombing, there's been a lot of talking about and raising of some of the issues, and slanting and distorting of the issues as well. But there is an opportunity here for reform that didn't exist before. And I commiserate with the tragedy for the victims of the bombing and all the possible scenarios of who done it and how it actually happened, and whether it was an extremist faction of the militia, which I doubt very seriously, whether the federal government bombed it, whether the Japanese bombed it. There are all kinds of different scenarios here that have been postulated with various affidavits and evidence to support various points of view. And I'm not at the point where I'm going to make a conclusion about any of that. I'm going to reserve judgment for a while until there's a few more chips in a row. But it's very interesting to watch the media spin and to watch also our reaction too. And I suggest that we be considerate in what we take on as fact and what we take on as speculation with regards to it all. Because it doesn't help our cause to speculate falsely and to spread false rumors about things that we really don't have substantial evidence for. Let's wait to see all the evidence, and then we'll bring forth the appropriate indictments. But until that time, it's better to reserve judgment. So, who really holds the power in Washington, D.C.? How do the political systems actually work? It's really very simple. The federal United States is a corporation and a national government both. When the federal government went bankrupt for the first time in 1930, which may be news to some people, but to others it's not news. But the government has been bankrupt 7 times in this century. And every time the federal government goes bankrupt, it has to reorganize. It has to raise the debt ceiling and go begging to the Federal Reserve to borrow some more money to keep the doors of the power structure open a little longer. Otherwise, Congress would be on an indefinite vacation, which might be a good idea. I would pay for a vacation, a permanent vacation for all of Congress for 5 years or so, and then maybe we could reinvent this thing, actually reinvent it, not Bill Clinton's reinventing government plan, but really reinvent it from the citizens' point of view this time, from the sovereign, we the people point of view once again. Who really directs the federal United States are the creditors. This is no great mystery to those who understand the law. Now, if you are a bankrupt company, corporation, or individual, who directs your affairs? Your creditors do. A bankrupt entity no longer has the legal power or authority to direct its own affairs. Every time the federal government went bankrupt, it had to transfer its authority over to its creditors in order to reorganize the assets to resolve the bankruptcy to the satisfaction of the creditors. Otherwise, they would go on permanent vacation. And so it's very easy to see why the elected representatives and the president and all the agencies of government are so beholden to the creditors of the federal United States, who actually direct the government. The secret government that we talk about is, yes, there is a secret government, and there's FEMA, and there's people impersonating presidents, but more than that, it's behind the power structure. The invisible power structure here is pulling the strings of the creditors, who are in fact then directing the United States federal government. If you wonder why NAFTA and GATT were passed with so little debate, it's because it was all smoke and whistles. It had already been decided by those who direct the government that these are the bills that are going to be passed, including the counterterrorism bill and everything that Congress does, except maybe making some ridiculous joint resolution about making something a national holiday for parakeets or something. That, they may have some power, but not a lot. The real significant bills and the real significant budgets are directed lock, stock, and barrel by the creditors. We either fund them or we don't fund them. It's as simple as that. If you wonder why they're building prisons instead of schools and they had to cut the lunch program, it's because that's the agenda of the creditors of the federal United States. We can afford to build prisons, no problem. We can afford to put 100,000 new revenue agents out on the street, call them police, but what we're really doing is trying to raise some more revenue to keep the government open. We can afford to put a rapid strike force out there. We can afford to bring in 500,000 United Nations troops and build all these concentration camps, but we can't afford money for education, we can't afford money for school lunches or anything else that's really important. So be very clear that it's the creditors of the federal United States, which is the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, and the sovereign powers behind that are the creditors who are directing it. All of the nation states of the United Nations are bankrupt. It's one of the conditions of membership, by the way, of the United Nations. You have to be a bankrupt country. Otherwise, you can't be subject to being controlled. Now, can you? When you become bankrupt, you transfer your sovereignty, because you stole it from the people, right? You stole your sovereignty from the people in the states, and now you basically hand it over to the creditors to direct the affairs of the nation and the spending policies, etc., etc. So how did all this happen? Well, we'll have to